Okay, so picture this. It's the 1300s. You wake up, look in the mirror, and your entire job for the day is to look as close to a beautiful corpse as humanly possible. No, seriously. The beauty standard was basically, have you considered looking like you're dying? And if you weren't already dying, don't worry, the beauty routine would help with that. Let's start with skin. The goal was pale, not just I avoid the sun pale. We're talking I have never once been outside, I subsist entirely on candlelight and disappointment pale, visible blue veins on your forehead. Chef's kiss. That whole slightly translucent, you can almost see my skull look. Peak hot. If you had any color at all, any hint of a tan, you were basically announcing to the entire court that you worked outdoors like a peasant. Which was, apparently, the medieval version of a situational L. So how did women pull off this undead aesthetic? A few fun options. You could stay inside like a medieval vampire. Or, and this is where it gets spicy, you could smear your face with something called ceruse, which was a paste made of vinegar and white lead, aged in clay pots, applied directly to your face. Daily lead on your face. Every day. It burned, it corroded your skin, it eventually poisoned your blood. But you looked rich doing it, so, worth it? The court said yes. Your liver said absolutely not. Now here's where it gets even more unhinged. You know how some people today skip meals and call it intermittent fasting and act like they discovered something new? Medieval noblewomen had a whole version of this, except it wasn't a wellness trend. It was a moral requirement. If you were eating full meals, people side-eyed you. Too much appetite meant you were indulgent, maybe even sinful. The thinner you looked, the holier you apparently were. Women would show up to feasts and just not eat, picking at bread, sipping watered-down wine, making sure everyone noticed how little they needed to survive. It was basically the original performative suffering Olympics, and the gold medal was sainthood. Speaking of which, Saint Catherine of Siena. She allegedly survived on almost nothing but communion wafers for years. Today we'd call that a serious medical crisis. Back then, they made her a saint. Her gaunt, hollow-cheeked, barely standing image became an actual beauty ideal that trickled out of the convents and into the courts. Nothing says aspirational like a woman who can't stand up unassisted. And noble families, here's the wild part, sometimes encourage this in their daughters. As a social flex, starving your kid could literally boost your family's religious prestige. Medieval parenting was something else entirely. Okay, but the skin and the starvation were just the warm-up. Let's talk about the forehead, because in the 14th century, nothing said I'm attractive, and also probably a genius, like having a forehead the size of a landing strip. The ideal medieval woman's hairline started somewhere around the back of her skull. To achieve this look, women grabbed tweezers and yanked out their hair one strand at a time. Sometimes they rubbed walnut oil or vinegar-soaked bandages onto their scalp to make the hair fall out faster. Some shaved the top of their head back an inch or two, just to push the hairline even further. We're talking the original five-head, and it was considered gorgeous. The justification, apparently, was religious. The Virgin Mary was always painted with a high, smooth forehead because the church controlled art and the church had opinions about foreheads. So a big blank brow symbolized spiritual purity and emotional control. You weren't supposed to look like you had feelings. You were supposed to look like a wall. A very holy, very empty wall. There's even a story, probably dramatized, but still, about a French noblewoman who plucked her hairline so aggressively that she permanently destroyed the hair follicles on her scalp. She had to wear increasingly elaborate headdresses to cover the damage. The headdresses got so big and heavy they gave her neck problems. And since medieval chiropractors were not a thing, she just prayed about it and kept wearing the hats. And the eyebrows? Gone. Both of them. Completely removed. Not shaped, gone. Because eyebrows showed expression, and expression showed emotion. And emotion made you look like a human being, which was apparently not the vibe they were going for. The ideal face was a smooth, expressionless canvas, like a mannequin at a Renaissance fair that somehow smells like rosewater and suffering. Alright, now let's talk about what was going on under all those layers. Because while the face was getting painted with lead and the eyebrows were being sacrificed to the church, the body was getting stuffed into a cot. Basically, an early proto-corset, fitted, tightly laced, stiff. You couldn't put it on yourself. You needed a maid to do it. And she had to pull the laces while you held onto a bedpost and tried to remember what full lung capacity felt like. The goal was a long, narrow torso, a small waist, and the general silhouette of someone who had been very gently pressed in a book. Movement was not the priority. Movement was for peasants. You were supposed to glide, slowly, like a very expensive candle melting in slow motion. By the late 1400s, some of these bodices were reinforced with reeds, whalebone, or metal strips. Women couldn't bend at the waist. If you dropped something, you just waited for someone else to pick it up. If you needed to run, well, why would you need to run? Running was for people whose lives had urgency. Yours was supposed to look like a painting. Over the corset went the outer gown, sometimes two, heavy velvet, Thick embroidery, floor-length sleeves, the whole outfit could weigh 15 pounds. You were basically walking around in a decorative sleeping bag. All day, every day. And you weren't supposed to sweat because sweat was common. So instead you just marinated quietly inside your own layers and called it grace. Now, because the beauty routine clearly needed more steps, let's add the hair bleaching. Blonde was the gold standard. Pun absolutely intended. Golden hair meant purity, youth, divine favor. Basically, if you were blonde, God had personally signed off on your existence. If you weren't blonde naturally, which statistically most people weren't, you had to fix that yourself. At home, with whatever chemicals you could scrape together. One popular recipe: saffron, lemon juice, and stale urine. You'd apply this mixture to your hair and then sit outside in the sun with a wide-brimmed hat that had the top cut out, so just your hair would roast in direct sunlight while your face stayed shaded. The result was sometimes a lifted, golden tone. More often it was dried out, straw-like hair, chemical burns on the scalp, and the subtle aroma of a barnyard. You'd walk into court smelling like a goat had opinions about your beauty routine. But your hair caught the candlelight, so technically, mission accomplished. There's a documented case of a noblewoman in 14th century England who went blind after bleaching solution got into her eyes. Her servants testified she'd been trying to match the hair color of a woman in a painting. A painting. She permanently damaged her vision, trying to look like a fictional version of someone who didn't exist. If that's not a metaphor for beauty standards across all of recorded history, I don't know what is. And through all of this, the lead paint, the starvation, the urine hair treatments, the corsets, the eyebrow removal, there was this underlying current of morality. Beauty wasn't just aesthetic, it was proof of virtue. Smooth, pale skin meant your soul was clean. A narrow waist meant you had self-control. Visible suffering meant you were closer to God. Your appearance was basically your permanent public character review. If you had a birthmark, people assumed something was off about you. If you were tanned, you were suspected of low breeding. If you had a crooked nose or a disfiguring scar, God help you, because society wasn't going to. Women who didn't conform to beauty standards weren't just considered unfashionable, they were considered suspect. Women who aged visibly, lived alone, had sharp features or unconventional looks. They weren't just unpopular, they were genuinely dangerous to be around, because society decided their outsides reflected their insides. This was the logic that fueled witch trials. Not always dramatic accusations. Sometimes it was just, she has an unfortunate squint and her neighbor's cow died. Off you go. So just to recap what we've covered: lead face paint, daily starvation as spiritual performance, competitive hairline destruction, urine hair bleaching, removing both eyebrows, getting laced into a stiff tube every morning while a servant pulled ropes attached to your ribcage, and all of it, functioning as a public declaration of your moral worth as a human being. And here's the part that should feel uncomfortable. None of this is as far in the past as we'd like it to be. The framing changes. The products change. The basic premise that how you look tells people what you're worth, that part never really left. We just traded the ceruse for retinol and called it progress. The filtered photos, the anti-aging creams promising you can be naturally ageless, the weight loss language wrapped in wellness vocabulary. It's the same deal in a different font. But that's the plot twist no medieval beauty manual ever included. You can opt out. Not perfectly, not all at once, and not without the voice in your head making snide comments about it. But you can. Because the standard was never designed for you. It was designed by people who needed you to be manageable. And you, reading this, are decidedly not manageable. Which, honestly, most beautiful thing I've ever heard.